Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It's Tuesday, and that means it's time once again for our ism segment. I don't think I've missed one of these in quite some time, if ever at all. Today, I'd like for us to talk about cronyism and perhaps related to it, nepotism. Cronyism and nepotism. Both of these perspectives or practices, really, again, they're not so much an ideology as they are a practice. They describe the giving of preference and favors based not so much on merit, but on the basis of relationship. Cronyism representing more a propensity to show preference towards one's peers and friends, with while nepotism being that same propensity only directed toward family members. My father used to tell that tired old joke where he would say, I think there's nothing wrong with nepotism as long as you keep it in the family. So, nepotism and cronyism are not positive things that people are prone to affirm the practice thereof, though again people may tend to do it. But the idea is that this is a failure of a meritocracy, and it can be wrong for that very reason, that if someone is in a position that has a responsibility to make decisions on the basis of merit, then that's very, very wrong. On the other hand, if I am personally the owner of a business and I would prefer to give a job or a contract or business to a friend or to a family member, there's nothing wrong with that. It might make me less able to compete in the marketplace and hurt my own business, but as the saying goes, my business is my business. So if I want to take that chance, I should be certainly free to do so. That said, I do think in general we find things working more smoothly and more appropriately when we practice what would be called a meritocracy, where rewards and contracts and opportunities, etc., are given out on the basis of gifts and skills. Now, one of the reasons why this can get kind of fuzzy is that we don't have really strict, measurable, definable standards by which we can determine in advance who will succeed and who will not in a given situation. And in fact, it's sometimes the case that you don't want to be doing business with family or with your cronies for precisely that reason, because you may get ruled out on the basis of a judgment that's out of line. Let me give you an example. If my boys had a little league game, I'm confident that they would not want me to serve as the umpire, because my practice would be, out of a desire to not appear unfair, to sort of make the close calls go against my sons or against their team. I'm not really being neutral. Or if I were the coach of the team, my sons probably wouldn't want me to coach their team, because I would want them to excel so far above their teammates that it was obvious why I chose them for what I chose them for. So there's tension in both directions. And again, we do need to acknowledge that not everything is measurable. I mean, every NFL fan, or virtually every NFL fan at one time or another, has been convinced that the quarterback sitting on the bench would do a better job than the quarterback out on the field. And they think they know better than the coach, who has a better chance of bringing home the victory. Well, maybe sometimes they do. I don't know. Maybe sometimes they don't. What I'm saying is we don't know for sure. So, one of the ways that we avoid cronyism, one of the ways that we avoid nepotism, is really to sort of blind ourselves from knowing in advance. I've been involved in multiple chili cook-offs, and I've been in chili. Oh, and by the way, I've won multiple times, just so you know. But in those contexts, again, we don't say, hey, this is RC's chili. What do you think of RC's chili versus what do you think of Bob's chili? We don't let the judges know whose chili is whose. And that avoids some of those temptations. So when we have the opportunity, I think that's wise. I think it's prudent. I think it's interesting, sort of part of the appeal of some of these different reality shows where people sing, but we don't see who it is that's singing, so that we're not led astray by our past perspectives. So let's push back against, and by the way, in cronyism especially, and nepotism, it's especially bad when it touches on government, because this is not the same situation as a private business, because a private business belongs to somebody. But with government is an agency of force, and when you're handing out special favors to your friends, that's not so good. That's one of the ways that we create what's called crony capitalism, which is really not capitalism, but fascism, where people in positions of political power hand out political favors to people in business in exchange for favors. So let's push back. Let's not embrace cronyism or nepotism, but let's also acknowledge that it's not always clear who the best man for the job might be. If you've been following along in our journey through the parables of Jesus, then you know that the last one we covered was the parable of the lost coin from the Gospel of Luke, and the next one after that is the parable of the prodigal son. However, I'm pretty sure we already covered that one when it shows up earlier in the Bible. It is so rich, so beautiful, so amazing. Let me commend to you Tim Keller's book on our prodigal God. It's just absolutely amazing. I would have some differences with Dr. Keller, but knowing that and reading that book, I would nevertheless was so profoundly blessed by it and would encourage you to take a look at it. So today we're going to go ahead and move forward to Luke chapter 16, beginning in verse 19, to Jesus' parable of the rich man and Lazarus. We read, "There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen and lived in luxury every day. At his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, covered with sores and longing to eat what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. The time came when the beggar died, and the angels carried him to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was in torment, he looked up and saw Abraham far away, with Lazarus by his side. So he called to him, 'Father Abraham, have pity on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, because I'm in agony in this fire.' But Abraham replied, 'Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, while Lazarus received bad things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been set in place, so that those who want to go from here to you cannot, nor can anyone cross over from there to us.' He answered, Then I beg you, Father, send Lazarus to my family, for I have 5 brothers. Let him warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. Abraham replied, They have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to them. No, Father Abraham, he said, but if someone from the dead goes to them, they will repent. He said to them, If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, they will not be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. Well, you'll remember again from the beginning of this series, we talked about the 2 errors that we fall into with the parables, that we either don't enter enough into the parables and we just take one snippet of meaning from it and leave the rest alone, or we go too far into it and turn it into an allegory. This is one of those where we're tempted to turn it into allegory, or at the very least try to draw conclusions that aren't the intention of the story. We're told so little about heaven and hell that this kind of tempts us to use it to fill in the blanks. I'm not sure that that's particularly helpful. I will say this. There's certainly a lesson here that we would do well to learn, whether we are proclaiming a message or whether or not we're listening to a message. And here's what it is. I received years ago a appeal letter from a large parachurch ministry. In fact, the largest parachurch ministry in the United States. And they had produced a movie about the life of Jesus that had been translated into many, many languages and shown all across the world, and good for them. But in this appeal, they talked about how some person in some far-off land had died and appeared before the throne of God, and God sent her back with a message, and then she got people to come and see the movie, and she was converted, etc., etc. And therefore, we should all make a donation. Now, there's plenty of good reasons to donate to this organization, but the idea that they think that a story of someone coming back from the dead to tell someone what to do is going to make a difference seems to me to suggest that somebody, at least in the fundraising letter writing group, doesn't know their Bible very well. And we see this not just from this particular group. Some of the best-selling books in the Christian realm over the years have been along similar lines. But I don't think that's the point. I think the point is actually very much like the point that had been made in the parable of the prodigal son. That while that Lazarus, as it were, is a kind of symbol for the Gentiles, while the rich man is a symbol for the Jews. The Jews had been given all these things, and Lazarus was lowly and humble. And by the way, I should say that please do not draw from this that if you are prosperous and well off in this life, you're going to hell, and if you're poor and miserable in this life, you're going to heaven. That's not the message. The message is that those who had been given much were rejecting what they had been given. That's why this whole latter part of, hey, send them to go warn my brothers. No, they have Moses and the prophets. That didn't help them. They're not believing. That's what the message is about. What does this say to us? Well, what it says to us, friends, is we need to cherish and share the riches that we have been given in Christ. We need to, and by that, I don't simply mean material wealth. I mean the prophets and Moses and the New Testament and the message of the gospel. We need to be those eager to go feed others. I've said it once, I'll say it the rest of my life. I'm just a beggar telling other beggars where to find bread. I'm not dead yet, but I am Lazarus in that sense. I want all of us to use the time that we have while we're still here to tell others about Jesus. Are we living in the last days? Yes, of course we are. Before, however, you start packing for the Rapture Express, You might want to remember that your grandparents were also living in the last days, and their grandparents before them, and their grandparents before them. Luther lived in the last days, as did Aquinas before him, and Augustine before him. Same for Polycarp, John the Revelator, Peter, and Paul. We have been in the last days for close to 2,000 years now. How much longer will the last days last? I don't know. The Bible itself describes its own times as being a part of the end times. Among other places, Peter, during his sermon at Pentecost, describes what everyone was seeing by alluding to Joel's prophecy of the last days. Peter said, "But this is what was spoken by the prophet Joel. And it shall come to pass in the last days, says God, that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your young men shall see visions. Your old men dream dreams. And on my manservants and on my maidservants I will pour out my Spirit in those days, and they shall prophesy." Acts 2:16 and 17. Does that mean that Jesus will return soon? Well, he certainly might return soon, but this specific text does not say that. We commit the fallacy of equivocation, using the phrase last days in two different ways, but acting as though we're only treating it one way. If, quote, last days always means that Jesus is coming soon, and soon cannot be 2,000 years from now, then the Bible is in error. Last days, however, can refer to any number of things. It can refer to the last days of the old economy. When the New Testament was written, the utter destruction of Jerusalem was coming soon, and with it, the end of the temple system. Last days can refer to those days immediately preceding the physical return of Jesus to earth. No one would dispute that. He is coming again, and my hope is that it will be soon indeed. Last days can also, however, refer to that time between the ascension of Christ to the right hand of the Father and his return. And that, we know, is a time period that has almost stretched to 2,000 years by now. All three of these uses are perfectly legitimate ways to speak of the last days, though each can be referring to actual days that are rather far apart. The old economy has come to a close. We are in the period between his ascension and his return, and we might be just around the corner from his return. All of which means that we are called, as our grandparents were, and their grandparents were, to be ready for his coming, to pray for his coming, to look for his coming. Jesus himself, when he walked the earth, did not know the day or the hour. Matthew 24:36. It demands immeasurable hubris for any man to suggest that he knows what Jesus did not. May he, that is Jesus, may he grant us all the grace to long for his return, to prepare for his return. And may he, when he returns, find us faithful. You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.